Hi, Greg and Rob. I'm Anna Hantek da Costa, and I'm going to be sharing my reflection via video this week and just kind of giving you my process and my thoughts and some of my wrestlings with this activity of analyzing my lessons from last week in my Spanish 4 classroom. So let's dive in. So to start off, I just kind of wanted to show what I've kind of learned from the readings prior to entering class and some of the things that I took away. One of my notes was from the Hattie article and invisible learning. And one of the big things that I took away was I didn't think of it as a pyramid initially, as far as looking at surface, deep, and transfer. For me, it was kind of just like these parallel lines, like they had mentioned in there. And with that being said, I kind of had it categorized into ideas, thinking, and then constructing. And on that page 29, it talks a lot about how you need to find the right balance of all of them. So the good thing was I walked into class last Monday kind of thinking like, okay, like it's all good and it's not necessarily that surface is bad or you only want transfer, but you need to have a good and proper balance of all three. And that was kind of my big takeaway from that Hattie article. Now looking at the Richard Church and Morrison article, the Making Thinking Visible, there were a lot of really good nuggets in here. I think one of the things, though, that kind of led on to this journey of learning about surface, learning about deep and transfer was that research suggests that most people are not sharply aware of how they go about figuring out a problem or coming to a position on the issue. And I think that that speaks just mounds to what we're trying to figure out as to how do we get them to learn and to understand the process of transfer, because a lot of people don't realize how to do that. And that was pulled from the article on the intro page 16. Um, I also thought something that kind of took you from surface to deep to transfer was that idea of, are you thinking with, are you thinking about, and where's your thinking going? Uh, and then finally, the last thing that was really kind of stood out to me is what kind of thinking do you value and what kind of thinking do you want to promote? And that was one of the last kind of takeaways and questions in that article of just when we're teaching our students, is it just surface thinking? Do we just want them to be able to say facts? Or is it what are we trying to promote their thinking and how are we going to get them to the transfer, hopefully, at the end of or at some point throughout a lesson or a unit, how do we get them to be able to do that type of knowledge and go a little bit beyond? I really enjoyed the text that was pulled from the Heineke and McTighe readings. It was especially on page 104. A lot that stood out to me was how to make this hit home and be very specific to our CLD learners. And so here they talked a lot about analyzing transfer meaning goals for language. So also looking at our language, prioritizing language that is pertinent to engaging in learning, and making sure we're well aware of that. It said that begin with your transfer goals, long-term authentic goals of independent learning and meaning goals, enduring understandings and essential questions. So just finding those goals, being able to pinpoint them, but also have the language for our students knowing where we are headed with these goals. Some of my wrestling. So when I got to class, I didn't know if I really felt confident or that I had mastered determining between the three. I know that when we did our Jamboard activity, I really felt like I struggled, and I was super glad to have a group that seems really knowledgeable in this topic and able to help out. And so I loved the way that in class we saw it more as a pyramid instead of these parallel lines. That pyramid gave me some more just kind of notes and things to chew on as I'm spinning around with these new ideas here. So I kind of liked your guys' model and I turned it into a pyramid, and that really helped. And I think the big thing that helped me really understand how to determine if it's more deep or if it's actually transfer is thinking about how are you applying that knowledge to novel situations. And fortunately, I do come from a school that in Jeffco that does a lot of backwards design. And so that does help because I believe that when we put together our assessments, we really do try to think about how could they use this Spanish language or what we're teaching them in a new situation, in a novel situation, or more in a realistic situation for them. And so I think being able to see it on a pyramid and draw it out and kind of take notes, and along with the Jamboard activity, really helped me to be able to see where things go. I know that Greg brought up some tough questions of like, do we always need transfer? Is it a mixture of all three? And what's the right balance? And then he also mentioned that sometimes surface is okay. So I really liked that. And I think one of the big things that I took away from class was when we discussed the question of why teach surface if our students can just Google that. And that's something that I feel like got myself thinking about all week is the truth is, yeah, why do we teach that? And I know that a lot of our classmates shared some great thoughts of like having pattern recognition, having a better firm base, being able to remember, having more problem solving experience, teaching them to think as a computer instead of a human or vice versa was something that I pulled away. As a Spanish teacher, I mean, I have lots of students that are like, why do I need to know this if I can just Google translate it? And it's a fair argument, and I completely agree with them. And so it's like, how do we show that they need that surface knowledge and get them to transfer as well? And how do you move past that piece of like, you're right, you could just dig this surface knowledge up from anywhere. And one kind of takeaway I took from that discussion for myself personally was really thinking about how computers can't solve all of the things that the human brain knows. The computer doesn't know those pieces. And that's one of the arguments that I think I would present to my students if they were to ask about surface knowledge is, doesn't know, for example, in Spanish, there are, masculine and feminine, and the computer won't know that. Or, for example, especially with like idioms and, like colloquialisms that we use in our language, a translator won't be able to pick up on those pieces. And so that is another piece to it that it may seem like it is surface knowledge, but it may not transfer exactly into Google Translate as you want it to be. So one of this activity that we had with our graphic organizer really solidified my thoughts on the three and how to identify each one. I feel so much stronger in this. I feel like if I were to go back and do that Jamboard activity, it'd probably be a lot more successful than I was on the first try. And so it was really cool for me also to just be able to go back and see my lessons from this past week and how much of each I do. And I was amazed by like a lot of what I teach is just surface, just very basic, can you know this information or not? My lessons all revolved around just, learning the basic vocabulary for human rights along with active and passive voice. And so a lot of it was just, identifying, is this active or is this passive voice? What is this vocabulary? What does this vocabulary have to do with, et cetera, et cetera? Um, I think some of the things that really helped though was to see how much of each I'm doing and to see, and it was also like a little assuring because I was nervous at first, like, am I only doing surface to find some transfer in my lessons? And it was kind of like my classes were kind of scaffolded where they would start with a lot of surface and then build up to some deeper thinking. And then finally, there was like one activity per lesson that kind of dived in more into those thoughts about transfer and what this looks like. One of the big pieces of transfer I saw in my class activity was where they were looking at a song by Daddy Yankee. He's from Puerto Rico, and they were taking that song and diving into the lyrics, but seeing how the issues of human rights in Puerto Rico relates to that of the United States. And so that was pretty cool to see them being able to draw those two comparisons and have that transfer piece of like, this is a new situation. I've learned about it from this man's perspective, but now can I look at it from my own and in this way? So that was pretty cool to be able to see that all of those pieces are sort of happening in my classroom. Obviously, they need, more refinement and being able to add and, better a lesson after it's been taught. Finally, how I want to start planning and working towards this for the final kind of part to my reflection is what are my next steps? My next steps is I want to be better at this and I want to be more intentional. I don't just want to teach my students just surface knowledge. I would like to see more deeper thinking happening in my classroom, along with leading up to more moments for transfer and for them to be able to take their Spanish and put it in more novel and real life situations. So I think my next steps is going to actually begin to start to use this graphic organizer more often, but do it prior to teaching a lesson. So to kind of, put out all the pieces to the lesson for the day, because I teach 90-minute blocks. So it's a longer period of time and it does give you a chance to get through a lot of different things. So one of the things that I would like to do for our next step is to have my graphic organizer as I'm putting these lessons down and, jotting them down and seeing which category they go into to understand more what kind of thinking am I challenging my students to do? What am I expecting them to produce? What am I hoping that they know and understand? And I think that overall, this will help my teaching and my students who are hopefully learning, more of this real life skill of how can I take this language and use it in different settings. So thank you so much for taking some time to listen. I have really, really enjoyed this week's thoughts, this week's activities, and just challenges to help me grow as an educator. Thanks and have a great week, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye.